Eric, I like the idea of alternative concepts of God because it gives me a bigger possibility space to see what might be real. The problem is when I get into it, I feel like I'm in a blizzard and the snow is so thick that I can't see anything. So help me understand some of the different possibilities of alternative concepts of God, maybe in relationship to traditional theism. We have pantheism, panentheism, value, deism, and each one has its own varieties.
Right. Yeah, it can feel like a blizzard. And it's interesting that so much new work is being done now. I think that sort of the older, the POG, the personal omni-God, has less of a grip on people's minds.
That's a God that's omni-powerful,
Yeah.
all-powerful, knowing, omniscient, knows everything, all
Omni-good
good, all free.
and personal. It's a person somehow.
Right, sure.
And that people, not just atheists, but theologians as well, have found that increasingly unsatisfactory. The paradoxes of omniscience and omnipotence, the other paradoxes associated with God, and just general atheistic
the problem
criticism.
of evil.
The problem of evil,
very
certainly.
Strong. Right.
So people have tried to come up with various other alternative concepts of God. And, if you're a theological realist, which it sounds like you are, thinking that there's some divine reality.
No, I'm not. I'd like to see if there
is. All right.
I'd like to be a theological realist. I'd like to be. I'm not.
Well, but maybe this will help with, because it sounds like maybe you are. So you think of there's some divine reality, and we take a more scientific approach where we're trying to understand it, right? And now we've got different theories about what it might be.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're trying to say, like, well, we had these old ones, but it wasn't clear they came from a kind of rational scientific approach to trying to understand divine reality.
Certainly they're all pre-scientific, for sure.
They're pre-scientific. So now you've got people starting to use kinds of images, metaphors, for instance, the computational metaphor, but for instance, metaphors of God's body or something like that. Think about the pantheists. So pantheists have thought that God is this everything.
Yeah.
Now, if it's just the universe, it sounds like you're just giving another name for the universe. Just calling it God. It's God because I like it, or something. And that's never really impressed people. Pantheism also has the problem of it's hard to relate to the universe, except to be in it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like to worship.
See, that doesn't bother me because
I
mean, I'd like to relate to it, but I want reality, even if I don't relate to it.
Right.
I'm willing to accept that if it made sense. I mean, I hope it doesn't. I hope there's something more. But if it's not,
but it's been a
big
problem
enough to take it.
It's been a problem for pantheists, right? To say the universe is God with a capital G, if you can't worship it or can't make religious sense out of that.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
they try to put some kind of a unity or some kind of a spirituality into it, but I don't see very much.
I would agree, and that's been a problem for traditional pantheism. Right? Now, you've got people who've tried to make it more interesting, pantheism. So as we're looking at ways of saying that, first of all, that God, this personal omni-God, was big and omni, and then people thought, like, well, what else is big and omni? Well, the universe seems, omni, all, total. Well, the universe, everything, or in that sense, or a world, all that concretely exists. So that's how they moved to pantheism, right? And pantheism has those problems that we just mentioned about personality, or or is it just another name for the universe? So people tried to think of stronger types of pantheism. So physicists and philosophers have both thought there might be multiple universes, many universes, right, in one gigantic world. So maybe it makes more sense to think of the divine as that total structure, the totality of all possible worlds or universes, right, together, and having
all
some
possible
unity.
ones, or the multiple universes?
All possible ones.
Oh, okay.
Well, you could go a little different ways on this.
Okay.
There are people who do different things. I like, Yujin Nagasawa's attempts to work this out, where he's trying to think of how, right, God in an Anselmian sense, that than which no greater is possible. And if you say that than which no greater is possible, it seems to involve possibility.
Right.
And that seems to suggest that idea of saying that's enclosure of all possible universes somehow as being in this one great thing. And through its necessary existence, it brings them all into existence, all the possibilities into existence. That's a kind of pantheism that could be religiously very interesting. It's not just giving our universe another name, Still has problems with personality, or maybe the more interesting question is, can we deal with gods that are not, religiously, with gods that aren't like us? Right? Some people think that the challenge to theism, theists are guilty of idolatry, creating God in our image.
Yeah, and that's the personal part.
The personal part. So maybe we should just get rid of this personal idea. And so maybe it's going to be, and I think it will be, one of the most interesting things to see religion developing in the West, of us learning to think of the divine in an impersonal way.
Which is more Eastern in some respects.
In some respects, it's more Eastern, but also in some respects, it's going back to older Western notions of the divine. In the Neoplatonists, right? The divine, the one of Plotinus, it's not a person. It's not personal. It's not conscious. It's not a mind. It knows nothing. It's above and beyond all that. So there's some older ideas that may be coming to the fore. So you asked about panentheism too, right? And that's sort of saying that God contains the universe, right? But is a little bit more than the universe that it contains. Or God contains all the possible worlds, but it's a bit more than that. So my own view, of course, with the little gods that I sometimes talk about, all these little gods that contain their own universes, is panentheistic in that way. So I think gods are like computers that run universes as programs inside them. Right? And so the sort of computer that's running the universe is a little bit bigger than the universe that it's running.
Yeah, panentheism, though, traditionally it's one God, and that all existence is within that God, but that God also transcends the universe. In your view, with your little gods, there's infinite many of them, or lots and lots of them, and yet none of them have the power of the one God of panentheism, traditional at least.
Well, think of it this way, right? There was the process theologians, process theology. That's where panentheism came from. That's one of the alternative conceptions of God.
Right, sure.
We talked about. And so,
how does that work? Process theology?
Well, sure. Process theology said things like, God starts out small and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So God is the self-surpassing surpasser of all. God surpasses everything else by definition, but God is also constantly surpassing himself, getting bigger, growing in all these ways as reality grows more complex and unfolds. I'm not very imaginative. I just said, what I think makes more sense is to say, well, there's a God, and it creates a bigger God, and it creates a bigger God, instead of having this growth process go on forever with one thing. It just is, you start out with a little one, and it makes a bigger one, and it makes a bigger one. So it's a very process view already. And I was inspired a lot by process theology. Right? So taking the process God and splitting it up into its stages made a lot more sense to me than just continuing. So I have a lot of contact there.
How about the view that underlying all of it, Plotinus is one example, Plato, that there's a value, an ethical requiredness, as a motivation. I wouldn't say cause, a motivation for the whole process. So you have all of your gods. Is there a reason why they're there? Is it there because they're good?
I think it's there because they're good. I think that all these gods are there because it's good. It's for the best. Now that, brings to mind John Leslie's work, his axiarchism. Axiarchism means axiology is value, right?
So value is the deepest.
Value is the deepest reason.
Yeah.
So he says that all the concrete things that exist, for the good in the greatest sense, for the best. It's value that brings, reality into existence. And I agree with him.
And value may have created gods in his view.
That's right.
And is that your view as well?
That is my view. Ultimately, the gods are brought into existence by abstract value. Right? It's better that there should be these things than nothing. And so I agree very much with Leslie on that point. I think John Leslie has gotten himself into some mathematical troubles. He thinks there's an absolute infinity of absolutely infinite gods. And they all kind of end up being copies of each other, which seems a little redundant. And I think it's a little problematic to just say there are just infinities. If you want infinity, you have to somehow derive it or generate it, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Instead of just saying infinite.
So you agree with Leslie's ethical requiredness being at the foundation, the generative foundation of reality. You agree that there's an infinite number of gods created in some sense by this value, but you disagree on the character and the nature of these gods. Is that right?
That's right. I think Leslie posited an infinity of all equally infinite gods, and they all end up being copies of each other, and that seems very redundant to me, and it faces logical problems. So I'd rather say that we get to infinity by growing, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, up to infinity.
And you populate those numbers,
That's right.
the growth with all different kinds of gods.
That's right. They're different generations of gods.
But not one of those gods are as good as any one of Leslie's gods. As big, as strong, as powerful, as all-knowing.
Yeah, well, I don't think Leslie's gods are big or powerful at all because they don't exist. But sure. Leslie's gods, no, they're less. They start out
Yours
small.
are less.
Mine are less.
Every one of yours are less than any one of his.
That's correct.
Okay.
His gods can beat my gods in a fight any day. Except all mine can gang up.
Yeah, but you can never reach infinity.
That's right.
So if all your
What do you mean
gods
you can never reach infinity?
if all of your gods ganged up, they couldn't surpass one of Leslie's gods, and he's got infinite number of those.
That's right. But my gods rise through all the transfinite degrees of, I'm an old mathematician, computer scientist, so I know about infinity. So we don't have to try to get there. We're not driving, right? We've got mathematical axioms and principles. So, but you're right. My gods keep growing in through all the greater infinities, whereas his are just much bigger, right? Absolutely infinitely bigger.
Right.
And I don't think any such things exist.
Right, and therefore yours are better and stronger because yours are real and his is not.
That's right. Yeah. It's a good advantage to have, right? Yeah, I don't have to worry about the imaginary guys who can beat me up, right? Not worried about them at all.
But the fact that you have an infinite number of real gods that are less than powerful you're very satisfied with that.
I'm as a philosopher, you should never be satisfied with what you're saying. I mean, I'm skeptical of what I'm saying. I mean, when you make something, when you try to create or generate a theory, you're always acutely aware of its faults and problems, right? So it's like, don't go in the kitchen if you don't want to, you don't want to see how food is made. I mean, so I think it solves the problems that the other theories can't solve. And so in that sense, I think it's better. Am I satisfied with it? No. I think a lot of work has to be done by me to try to make it stronger, make it better. It's fairly new, and I know people are going to be coming out with criticisms of it. Hopefully there'll be, serious and deep criticisms that I can look at and make it a stronger theory. So we'll see. Right now, satisfied? Yeah.